Hello and welcome to the Cuyamungue Institute, our Q&A Conversation for Exploration series. I'm Paul Robert, the Executive Director and President of the Institute, and along with my wife, Laura Lee, the Director of Research, Education, and Outreach. And on behalf of our Board of Directors, our advisors, our volunteers, our supporting members, we want to thank you for joining us today. The Cuyamungue Institute is an independent, nonprofit research organization committed to researching consciousness in the human experience following the footsteps of our founder, anthropologist Dr. Felicitas Goodman. And our focus is reflected in three main areas: experience, education, and exploration. We respect the path of academic balance, the creative pursuit of science, while advancing, conserving, and restoring a direct experience of the deeper human connection to all of life. And as an educational institution, we take an open approach, and we invite scholars in related fields to help broaden the scope of our own work and exploration. And that's why we call this Conversation for Exploration. On these Sunday discussions, full spectrum of topics from neuroscience, anthropology, archaeology, astronomy, philosophy, psychology, mythology, shamanism,
hey, it's
art,
a big
theater,
world out there, and we go exploring.
From the arts to the sciences and everything in between. Visit our website at CuyamungueInstitute.com. All of our presentations continue to be free, and as a nonprofit, we do invite you to become a supporting member. And we thank you, the community members who continue to support the mission of the Cuyamungue Institute. You know, ancient cultures are now widely being seen as more advanced, more sophisticated than previously thought. And there's a greater and greater evidence coming in for multiple migrations to the Americas at earlier and earlier dates. And our guest today is looking at ancient art and artifacts that tell a story of how they were so innovative, how sophisticated they were, how they had their own cosmology that can be decoded. And it looks very similar to many ways to our cosmology of today, including the one that we're finding with our own work here at the Cuyamungue Institute.
We're finding they're not only more sophisticated with earlier dates, but also that they too had a vast network of trade and exchange, of trade goods, of ideas, of tool-making techniques, of this very cosmology, mythology, symbology. That this was one of the first global cultures. And you could call this the Gravettian Globalization, extending not only Europe, as we know well, but into Siberia, into the Middle East, into parts of Asia. And our guest is here to demonstrate today the Americas as well. This was the culture that came down and populated the Americas among those multiple migrations at some earlier dates, if you follow the evidence. So this is the case that James Harrod will present here today with a lot of images, and suggesting that at the closing years of the last ice age, the Clovis culture here in America, well established with artifacts found all over, that they had ties to this Gravettian culture. Clovis people, named for one of the first sites where their very large, distinctive fluted points were found, Clovis, New Mexico, in 1929. Widespread, but all we hear about are those points, those magnificent, large, expertly knapped points. But what about their art? Why don't we hear much about that? Well, James, in conjunction with Michael Gramley, spent years looking and decoding that art and finding clear connections to that Gravettian culture of the Ice Age. He's here to show you that today. It's a wonderful story to be told by that art and other artifacts that we haven't heard much about, including a new interpretation of mammoth tusk sled rails, all of which speaks to the innovation, the brilliant use of materials that they had on hand, about the longevity of their culture, and in their spiritual message that resonates with us even today. So in surprising ways, we are finding deep, deep resonance with these cultures. They're to be celebrated and acknowledged. James Harrod is a scholar specializing in the origins of art and religion and evolution. He's explored rock art in Europe, India, Israel, Australia, and North America. At the Maine College of Art and Design, he taught a course on 2 million years of art in human evolution. He's published on East Africa Oldowan art, Acheulean petroglyphs in India, and deciphering East European upper art geometric signs on cave and portable art, something very dear to our hearts in this work. He's published on the evolution of global language families over the last 200,000 years, using a method that correlates genetics, archaeology, and linguistics. And as a psychotherapist, he's explored widely the origins of art, music, and trauma healing. He's a longtime member and teacher of this work of the Cuyamungue Institute, and he's incorporated this into that research. He has an MA in depth psychology from the Pacifica Graduate Institute and a Ph.D. in religion in comparative mythology from Syracuse University. His thesis was on the ancient Greek goddess Artemis. He did paleoanthropology fieldwork at Kobe Flora, Kenya, and he's the founder of the Center for Research on the Origins of Art and Religion, headquartered in the state of Maine, where he joins us today. Wow, what a long and varied career you've had and research, James. Welcome. Good to have you here again.
Thank you. Thank you.
So
Thank you for inviting me.
just to
It's
put
a
this
pleasure.
into context, we're finding, yes, earlier and earlier dates, multiple migrations in the Americas, and now this connection to Clovis. The only Clovis connection I'd heard about before to Europe was from
Bruce Bradley.
Bruce Bradley,
I remember that.
who was
yeah.
trying to say the Solutreans, a
Right.
late Ice Age culture, who also created those beautiful points, maybe came by boats. But I know that's highly controversial. You're finding that, in fact, the connection would be this global Gravettian culture, of which we find in the caves of France, all over Europe. They extended far into Siberia, among other places. And from there, they came down the land bridge and populated the Americas. What's the story? What do you see as the history? What's the connection?
Let's
to Clovis?
rewind and start at the beginning. Yeah.
Give it to us and how you're following the evidence.
So I'm going to do a slideshow in 3 parts. The first one, first third of it will be what I've learned in all the research in the last 4 years about shamanism and the portals and passages. And we'll take a break. We'll take a break for questions.
Yeah.
About a third of the way through, and then I'll switch to present the artifacts that Mike Gramley and myself have been looking at for the last few years and trying to understand. And then we'll take a break after another half hour, and then there are a few more slides from where we'll talk about the most recent work we've been doing.
Perfect.
And to understand the cosmology and the shamanism is to understand something that we widely recognize in all these early cultures. And it's a way to interpret the evidence and the symbology and its meaning. So that's an important piece of this puzzle.
Yeah. So I'll be giving a brief summary of the current thoughts of archaeology and anthropology have about Clovis, and so I'll give you the context for
Perfect.
that.
Okay. Do you want to start with your slides then, since you have that all
So it's pretty
nicely
intense.
arranged? Yeah.
Everyone has to be very attentive because it's a pretty detailed presentation.
Okay.
And this is hot off the presses.
Okay, so welcome everyone. I hope may you all enjoy this presentation. And thank you, Laura and Paul, for inviting me to give this talk. To begin, I, who have Viking and European Neolithic farmer ancestors, was taught by an Aztec shaman the Aztec daily chant to the sun and deities of the cardinal directions. Toward the end of the chant, one honors one's own tribe. Then we chant to honor the peoples who were on this land before we arrived. So as I'm now in Maine, I prayerfully honor the Akosisco Wabanaki people who came before us here on this land we now walk upon. And those who came before them, their Algonquin ancestors, and before them, their Clovis ancestors.
Hmm.
This presentation is an offering.
Hmm.
For me, descended from a colonialist frontiersman and pioneer settler of the Shawnee Territory Canelands, now called Kentucky. This is an offering for my unburdening.
Hmm.
My presentation focuses on the Clovis first people into the Western Hemisphere. They're one of the multiple waves of people who migrated from East Asia and Siberia across the Beringia land bridge into this hemisphere after the last glacial maximum, which was around 26,000 to 19,000 years ago. The topic of earlier migrations before the maximum, which have occurred, and other post-glacial migrations, I have to leave for another time to focus on the Clovis migration. The name Clovis comes from Clovis, New Mexico, which was identified and excavated about a century ago. The generally accepted view of Clovis culture is that Clovis flint knappers were among the best in the world, and they hunted mammoths and mastodons. If you Google Wikipedia, it has an entry titled Clovis Culture. It shows one photo. This is a Clovis fluted projectile point, which I show in this slide. That's the photo from Wikipedia. The flute is a single, long, narrow flake removed from the base upward. It's generally definitive for Clovis projectile points. It may have assisted the hafting of the point onto a spear. For 100 years, North American archaeologists generally view Clovis tools as about all there is to Clovis culture. And Clovis peoples were hunter-gatherers and used their tools for subsistence. Otherwise, it is believed that there is no known evidence that Clovis had any artistic or religious culture. This slide shows a typical view of a Clovis person hunting. The image is from a public museum in Green Bay, Wisconsin. The letter was sent to me by my colleague, Jim Bernack, a forester, conservationist, trapper, and outstanding researcher on prehistoric art in Wisconsin. He titled his email, Hunter Education Program for Early Man, and then says, Mastodon hunter about to find out where he is on the learning curve.
Indeed. Oh.
And now for something completely different. Here I am excavating in a trench at the Harvard and National Museums of Kenya Paleoanthropology Field School in Kubifora in 1990, where we focused on the Oldowan culture, such as at Olduvai Gorge, 2 million years ago. I've also been on portable art explorations, as Laura mentioned, in Northwest Europe. I visited Spain and France Ice Age cave art sites. I've searched for portable art in the Negev Desert, looking for Middle Paleolithic art on Harkarkom, and explored rock art in Australia and the Outback and Northern Territory, the Bhimbetka area of central India, which is a Acheulean or possibly even an Oldowan petroglyph site, and in Southwest US. For this talk, I focus on the Clovis First Peoples culture and especially shamanism. I will give an overview of how I think about shamanism with respect to Siberian, East Asian ethnography and archaeology as a predictor for what we should expect to find in Clovis artifacts. And then I'll present our findings at 5 Clovis sites. Over the past 4 years, working with archaeologist Richard Michael Gramley, we've discovered the first evidence that Clovis first peoples into the Western Hemisphere as early as 15,000 years ago made portable art sculptures, conducted mastodon ritual sacrifices, and shaman sled burials at portals to the lower world. We've identified this at 5 Clovis sites. Clovis flint knappers are known for being some of the most expert knappers in the world. Clovis sites occur all across North America and Central America. We view it as a Western Hemisphere descendant of the Eurasian Upper Paleolithic Gravettian culture. The Gravettian culture, named after a site in Europe, spanned about 30,000 to 20,000 years ago. This culture is known for its female figurines, zoomorphic sculptures, beads and other jewelry, bone and ivory, incised with zoomorphic and anthropomorphic figurations, and elaborate burials. This culture spread across all of Eurasia, had extensive trading networks, and some features continued into the Mesolithic and called the Epigravettian culture prior to the Neolithic. Dr. Gramley and I view Clovis as a late Gravettian culture. I've been decoding the Clovis eco-spiritual worldview by applying the Siberian, East Asian, and North American ethnographic literature on creation stories, soul experiences, shamanic practices, and beliefs about portals and passages to other worlds and back to this world. I offer highlights of our discoveries at the 5 Clovis sites, provide some reflections on indigenous religious traditions, which may provide resources for a new spirituality. Before I discuss the Clovis site art, I want to highlight 4 lessons I learned during the past several years of research on Siberian, East Asian, and North American creation stories, shamanic practices, and portals and passages. I have to say that before I worked on this in the last 4 years, my total focus was on Europe and Asia and Africa. So I had to do a lot of teaching to myself.
Yeah.
And you do that well.
So 4 points. Point 1, the value of creation stories is more than some sort of metaphysics. Every creation story is a story to guide the manifesting and unfolding of your personal creative process. Not only one's own creative process, every sentient being is in a creative process. Most relevant to Clovis sites, which contain remains of mastodons and mammoths, is the role of mammoth as a creator being. In Siberia and East Asia, mammoth is a creator being. Samoyedic peoples, the Selkirk, Nenets, and Nenets, reside in the Yenisei River basin, say that the god Num made the earth smooth. But mammoth made mountains, lakes, and then descended into the lower world. Selkirk say mammoth guards the entry from the middle to lower world. Or in a variant, they say mammoth bear, a combination figure. Mammoth bear guards the land of the dead near the entrance to the lower world. Also, dog is a guardian of the land of the dead. Dog may act as a helping spirit of the shaman in journeys into the lower world. A tree or river Y fork, where two parts of a river come together and join, is where different worlds interact. A tree fork was placed upon the grave of Altai Selkup shamans, and just as this, and the same for Altai Ket shamans.
Mm-hmm.
Turkic Dolgan people of the Tamir Peninsula on the Arctic say Mammoth created the landscape and then descended into the lower world.
Mm.
The Tungusic speaking Southern Evenk people, these are the people who gave us the word shaman and that tradition to know about. The Tungusic speaking Southern Evenk, these are the Altai Evenk, people say Mammoth used its horns, as they say in the current ethnography. They used their horns to draw clay, sand, and stones out of the primal waters, which grew into cliffs, mountains, and valleys. Then serpent crawled out of the waters after Mammoth, leaving a trail which became riverbeds and lakes. Mammoth and serpent, they say, are rulers of the lower world. In a contrasting variant, the Arctic Yukagir say that the creator being created the earth, but creating Mammoth was God's biggest blunder. Mammoth devoured all the trees and nothing was left but tundra. Mammoth created valleys and ravines for rivers, and finally it sank into a swamp, a portal to descend to the lower world.
Mm-hmm.
Mammoth is the guardian spirit of Yukagir shamans, the most powerful spirit, and could be ridden by shamans. Point 2, Siberian East Asian shamanism and its Western Hemisphere counterpart is the practice of moving self and another's animated spirit through portals and passages to more intense and revitalized life in this middle world. Point 3, for Siberian East Asian shamanism and for many indigenous peoples in the Western Hemisphere, there are basically two primary sacred passageways. There is the vertical axis of the cosmic tree, the axis mundi, the tree of life. Its roots at trunks and branches correspond to a lower world, middle world, and upper world. For some tribes, the tree of life is a singular tree between worlds. For other tribes, there are three cosmic trees, one in each of the three worlds. The second sacred passageway is the cosmic shamanic river. This was new to me. I had not realized its importance. I see it as a diagonal axis crossing the vertical cosmic tree axis. Both the vertical and the diagonal axes interconnect the lower world, land of the dead, and the upper world, where souls await and then descend to reincarnate in this life. This is a prominent motif in the Tungusic-speaking Evenk tradition. During creation times, they say the Milky Way was created as the ski track of the original bear man on a cosmic hunt in pursuit of the sun, mother of all life, who also was a moose or sometimes an elk. With respect to shamanic funerary ritual, the Evenki view the Milky Way as a path for the souls of the deceased. The Milky Way is part of the shamanic sacred river, which they call the Engdeket, which means the hidden. It flows upstream to the upper world as the Milky Way. The Engdeket's lower half flows downstream to the lower world, land of the dead. A shaman takes the deceased's physical soul, as they call it, the physical soul, on a raft down the river. Along the middle Engdeket is the clan river world with tributaries. Each clan has its tributary, where they have a storehouse in which resides their clan deity and ancestor images. And each clan member's so-called double soul, or twin soul, or soul double is in that storehouse. Each living clan member has a double soul, which is stored there. An old woman, mistress of the dead, resides at each storehouse and receives the souls of the deceased. Finally, a shaman, with the help of eagle and dog, two psychopomps, with eagle and dog, or sometimes other spirit helpers, transports the deceased's physical soul to the land of the dead. In the lower world, the physical soul transforms into what's called the shadow soul. At a later time, usually during a collective ceremonial, the shaman assists the shadow souls that lived a good life and the souls of children to journey, ascending the cosmic river, the Milky Way, to the upper world. There, the celestial old woman, who is mistress of the dead and mistress of all life, gives the shadow souls a new substance, so that each transforms into an Omi soul, spelled O-M-I. Then she sends the Omi soul on a ray of sunlight to reincarnate in a woman's womb. Point 4, what is an Omi soul? This is very important. In Evenki Tungusic, the word Omi means to do, to create, to originate, to initiate. In other words, reincarnation means and is the reincarnation of creative potentiality. The essence of a living soul is its creative power. It is the invisible one in each of us who creates through us. As the Algonquian Innu people of Labrador say, each person who dreams a major spirit animal, of which they have 4, is religiously and psychologically obligated to manifest and express this in making forms of creative art. These animals are calling us to do this, just as they now are calling us to save them. Now for some artifacts. Here is an East Asian artifact that is one predictor for what we've found at Clovis sites. It was on Sakhalin Island, opposite the mouth of the East Asian Amur River, which in one part of it is the boundary between Russian Siberia and China. East Asian and Amur River, and found in the grave of a Tungusic-speaking Wilta shaman. It is an engraved antler staff. The shape of the staff itself roughly in the shape of Sakhalin Island. And actually there are little incisions, engravings on it, which only can be explained as landscape features. So on the map of Sakhalin Island. The incised figurations on it depict all the annual Wilta ceremonials, which the shaman led and facilitated. The Angdeket River is represented by a long serpentine shape with triangles along each side of it. In the upper right of the slide, a deceased person is depicted riding on the psychopomp dog to the lower world. In the far bottom right, depicted on the staff, is Kori, K-O-R-I, Kori the sacred eagle. Kori lives in the lower world and helps the shaman take the physical soul there on a raft and return safely to the middle world. Just to the left of that image is Kori, the sacred eagle, depicted on a shaman's drum. It has an open beak, as if calling. Neighboring Nanai shamans on the mainland, near the mouth of the Amur River, the lower Amur, carry a symbol of the Kori eagle on their headdresses. Of course, I don't have to mention indigenous people in the Western Hemisphere. Eagle Thunderbird is like a major figure. The central photo in color shows the antler staff depiction of the Angdeket River. It ends at a large complex diamond shape, which is at the top of this photo. Inside a diamond of dots is an inner diamond, and inside it is incised a tiny circle. I suggest that the circle represents the return to the origin womb source of all life. And I decode it this way because in the Gravettian culture of Europe, with all of its cave art, and all the way back to the Aurignacian Chauvet cave, the back end of the cave is the origin womb source of all life, and all the animals depicted on the cave art radiate out from that origin womb source. Megan Musso, excuse me, I skipped a paragraph. The Algonquin Beothuk of Newfoundland are extinct. At their cemeteries, archaeologists and collectors dug up several hundred of their burial pendants. Now they are stored at a museum on the island. The Micmac artist, Megan Musso, created a half-dozen large versions of them, which were on display at the Portland Museum of Art Triennial Show in March 2022. I see this design as remarkably similar to the Wilta shaman's depiction of the cosmic river that carries the souls of the deceased. If so, this supports inferring that the Algonquin and Clovis peoples had an ancestral homeland in the Amur River Basin and Sakhalin Island, and are descendants of the Tungusic people. I would add that these Tungusic people moved up the inland, probably up the coast, the Pacific coast of Siberia to northeast Siberia, where they would have met other peoples coming across, probably Samoyedic, coming across the Arctic from the Yenisei area and interbreeding in northeast Siberia and crossing the Beringia land bridge into the Western Hemisphere. And in that peopling wave, probably, as we now think, contrary to the current consensus in archaeology, they came down through that ice-free corridor very early and did it by dog sleds. So let's take a little moment for any questions on the shamanic
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
So you
detail.
want to toggle that so we can see, Paul?
Yeah.
The question would be, and raise your hand in the room if you'd like to pose your question. I see many in the chat room, but the reason you establish these beliefs is because we can find similar evidence early on among the Clovis, and you're going to show us artwork that's going to correlate to known indigenous cultures, correct? This is why you're making the connective tissue here.
The connection is at least by one major Russian linguist. Algonquin language is related to the Nivka language on Sakhalin Island. There are different branches of that language family. According to genetics, the genetics is from Siberia and from Amur River Basin. According to archaeology, the tools have features which come from Siberia, East Asia.
And I think even the DNA
and
evidence.
my focus is the comparative mythology, which is amazing, precise, predictive parallels.
Right.
And the parallels, many of them, are only found in the Amur River Sakhalin Island region, not in other parts of Siberia, not in Europe, and so forth. So people are migrating up from the Amur River during the last glacial maximum. People had to move south, except for possible mammoth refugia actually in around the Arctic area, which would be amazing because the glaciers are like a mile high. The glaciers came all the way down to southern Siberia, and so a lot of the people moved down into the Amur River Basin.
Right.
And Altai itself, like at Malta, where we find all the female Gravettian figurines, dozens and dozens, and sculptures and incised plaques with mammoths and the triple worlds on them and everything. At Malta, 20,000 years ago, that was also a refugium area.
We were friends before she passed away with Jan van Ysselstein, who worked directly with the Olchi people, spoke their language, recorded their language, worked with their shamans out of Seattle. And she said that she'd always comment, their myths go back at least 15,000 years because they speak about the mammoths. They had mammoths present in their myths.
I didn't know that. That's great.
Yeah. We've got, let's start in the order we see them.
Well, Tony's first, followed by Julie. Tony, go ahead. Tony is an advisor to the Institute as a astrophysicist. Hi, Tony.
And our
Hi, all.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. It's really interesting. I'm just full of questions. You have a most interesting hypothesis for migration, and there are multiple ideas about migration these days. It's not quite easy as the land bridge.
Multiple migrations, yeah.
Multiple migrations. And I'm also thinking that DNA has been such a powerful tool for literally plotting on the globe migration. Has this entered in to the domain you're looking at in a more precise way than you've talked about yet today?
Yes. Actually, I posted a paper which is not published, too long and complicated to publish. I posted a paper on 12 waves of migration into the Western Hemisphere. And that's posted on my academia.edu and my ResearchGate webpage.
Would you possibly put that on the chat so that we can look this up?
I don't know how to do that.
But we can do it. We can help with that, Tony.
Yeah.
You can just Google James Harrod at researchgate.net and my webpage will come up.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you just scroll down. It's actually probably in the top 4 or 5 articles that you'll scroll down through.
And we'll post that on our YouTube.
And there is a massive amount of information on all my research, which are really like supplemental material files for publications that are there. It's probably 400 or 500 pages.
It's been out there 30 years. There's a lot. Yeah.
Just a minor thing, yes.
So with respect to the multiple migrations, I put together in that 12-wave paper the genetics. I was really focused on the genetics, languages, and the archaeological sites, which I see as parallels, and all the archaeological sites and some genetic sites in Siberia, East Asia, which are relevant to the migration routes. I view I could spend a whole day on just the migration routes, but in a couple minutes, I can say that my view, I hold to the view that the first peoples that we have any evidence for came over during the last interglacial about 125,000 years ago. And that evidence is in California and Central America, Mexico.
You'll have to follow up on that one.
Wow.
It's pretty clear that people came before the last ice age because we have dozens of sites on the east coast of the US and South America that are 20 to 30,000 years old.
And Bruce Bradley makes the case skin boats following the coast would be feasible.
I have my own humble opinion about that.
Okay.
I accept the research that there are tools like the Solutrean points he talks about from a little later than the Gravettian. Those Solutrean points have points at one end and points at the other. They're called bipoint tools. They're very beautifully done, but Clovis doesn't make bipoints, nor do the West Coast people like at Cooper's Ferry and stuff around 16,000.
Okay.
They're not really making bipoints. The bipoints actually occurred down in South America, like on the north coast of South America and along the western coast.
Mm-hmm.
And they're dated at sites around 16,000 or so, 15,000. So, but I don't want to get into
Yeah,
that.
let's not get lost. There's lots of other questions. What else, Tony? Because we got
probably Neanderthals were here 125,000 years ago, and then Homo sapiens sapiens by at least 30,000 years ago. I think the evidence, genetic, archaeological, points to that.
Perfect.
intriguing.
Well, thank you. This is very interesting. I keep on wishing that I was seeing a map because I'm not familiar with all the sites in Asia, etc. that you're mentioning. But I'd love to see a map.
Also, the theory that people, because there's what's genetically called the population Y, which means a population we don't know who they are.
Mm-hmm.
It's very early. Some people have argued they came by boat across the Pacific from Polynesia. This is tactically, oh yeah, they could have come 200,000 years ago by a raft, a bamboo raft or whatever. But as far as I can find, there's no evidence.
Yeah.
Plus this mysterious population Y. I talk about that on my post on the 12 waves. It's another discussion, and I think the most current evidence says no, that population came during the late glacial or
Okay, enough on migrations. There's many other questions.
I think
What's next?
Well, thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
Yeah, always
Thank you,
great
Tony.
questions.
Yeah.
And Julie Strider, who is a longtime
It's
board
an
member.
important topic, but we got lots to cover here.
Hi,
Okay.
Julie.
Hi there. I'm Professor Harrod. You mentioned that they put a tree fork onto the shaman's grave, and I wondered if they did the same with the deer horn, the deer antlers.
The antlers.
If in fact they were put on the shaman's grave as well, and do you know why they did that?
Actually, I'll be talking about that because we have that possibility from our Clovis sites, evidence of such a thing, but there's two ways to interpret it.
And you'll get into that a little bit later. Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
What was the
Okay, thank
first
you.
part of your question? I didn't quite hear that.
No, you mentioned about the tree fork being placed on the
Okay.
graves.
I'll be talking about that because that's a major thing in the Clovis sculpture.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
Ys are one of those prominent geometric
you, Julie.
symbols in cave art. We see a lot of Ys, and you're saying there's an interpretation, there's a symbol, we can decode that. That's going to be intriguing. Let's just leave it at that until you get to it
Has
to
to be
illustrate
another
it.
discussion because I have to focus on Siberia and the Western Hemisphere. And also a new article was just published a few weeks ago on the Y symbol. And
Oh,
just for me to discuss what they think it is would take about an hour.
okay. But a tree, a river, we see trees branch out in a Y. We see rivers branch out in a Y. It's an obvious symbol that nature provides, and it connects the worlds. That makes sense. A crossroads. Yeah,
It's a
it's
crossroads.
logical. But
It goes right to the current present day because when I was in Bhutan, there's one of the most famous Tibetan or Bhutanese Buddhist sanctuaries is in the fork of the Y.
a sacred space. Okay.
It's next to it in that Y fork. And the Japanese who like to make major spiritual religious contributions to Bhutan, as well as Nepal, at that site in Bhutan, they have put benches and statues and everything facing the Y fork.
Like the chi, the life force is very prominent there. So when the landscape itself gives us symbols, we see it right there that nature provides it. We pay attention. I mean, that's logical, right?
That's probably
Nature herself is in dialogue with us, and we see her symbols and we respond to them. That is so logical. Fred?
Fred Smith is next. Fred is also an advisor to the Institute.
And a Vedic scholar.
A Vedic scholar and a professor emeritus from the University of Iowa. How's that? Hi, Fred.
Hi there. Thanks a lot. I'm really enjoying your presentation, James. Look forward to meeting later on. And of course, I have like 100 questions, but I will reduce it to like maybe, I'll just take one of them. And that is the relationship between the mammoth and the serpent. And as you might know, that in Sanskrit, the word naga is primarily, one of its phonic serpentine protectors of the earth, but it's also a word for elephant.
Really?
Oh
Yeah,
my
it is. And I mean, there's like 100 words for elephant, but one of the main ones actually is naga. And I have always wondered about that because, I mean, if there is anything that you can imagine would not do well in the water, it's an elephant. And so I was, was kind of thinking about this connection. And this is a connection that you've also seen in the Western Hemisphere? Between like a mastodon or a mammoth and
that's a good question. I have to think about that. The serpent motif, because I don't think I've identified serpent sculptures yet.
But think of an elephant's trunk. It's rather serpent-like, isn't it? So morphology has a connection.
That's a trunk. that
Yeah.
puts it together.
Interesting.
Yeah, so, but I have to think about that, and we'll talk about it as I I'll search around for more information on serpent. But I will say at Malta, which genetically studies have shown the Malta genetics is related to the indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere.
Mm.
They have a plaque. The plaque has 3 spiral serpents and 3 spiral circles incised on it. It's a famous plaque. Will pop up on any search on Google when you say Malta. Those concentric spirals are the 3 worlds represented. And on the side of that plaque, which has not been recognized as far as I know by anyone, is a sculpture of a mammoth. The head and the trunk goes down the side of the plaque. When you flip that plaque over, on the backside are 3 serpents in parallel. And so there again, the mammoth and the serpent co-occur in their mythic world, in their symbolic world. And I didn't think of it before, but the trunk goes down that left side of the 3 circle plaque. And when you flip the plaque over, those 3 serpents are vertical too. So they're lined up with that trunk in a way.
So hybrid figures are very interesting. We see those, the Lion Man sculpture of Germany, and we see the cave shamans with the bison gear. And but I mean, hybrid figures are interesting, and you've got the bear man, and then you've got the mammoth serpent. So I'm just noting it, that hybrids and putting 2 elements together is interesting.
Right, and in Algonquin culture and religion, the underwater serpent is a major figure, almost as important as the eagle. So, and all the other animal spirits, but it's a huge figure. It's depicted all over the place in the rock art of Algonquin peoples, and so, and even in other non-Algonquin.
The feathered serpent, the bird serpent of Mesoamerica and Europe.
Southerly, it's this feathered serpent, and all the way into Mesoamerican art and everything.
Yeah.
I just want to say one quick thing for Fred, who has a parrot on his back.
Yeah.
Ah, yes.
I'd be afraid to mention this because of other archaeologists who work in Texas, New Mexico, southern area. There are tools they call spurred artifacts, which when I look at them, several are parrots. The spur is their beak. And so we have, it doesn't occur anywhere else but in a few sites in Texas that are Clovis or Folsom sites, which is the neck which descends from Clovis. They like parrots down there.
Yeah.
Yeah. The macaws we find widely.
Sharon asked the question, is Naga ever associated with lightning?
With lightning? That's a good question. And I will say that the semantic horizons of the word Naga in Sanskrit are really vast. And I can look that up easily, but I can possibly look it up in 5 minutes. But there is that possibility, and I understand why the question is asked.
Yeah. Okay.
Intriguing.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, Fred, we want to connect you with James, and
we have meetings set up.
Oh,
we do.
good. I want to be a part of it.
Yeah.
Don't leave me out.
All right. So it's also interesting that this repository of culture that you described, not only of culture, but of the biosphere, forms live in this repository. We live in this repository. Souls pass over into this repository. It's interesting, this concept of this womb, from whence we go and whence we return, this repository.
Yeah.
And its symbology. It's just beautiful. It's just beautiful. The Milky Way is the ski track of the bear man. I mean, it's just like it's
I
just
love that.
fun to
Yeah.
decode the
Yeah.
myths and the cosmology, isn't it?
Yeah.
So
I
and
know
then
we want to
see
go.
those symbols again. So next phase.
We'll
next
go to the
part.
next phase.
Yeah.
I know, Tyler, you have made many comments in the chat room. You're welcome to raise your hand if you wanted to ask a question, but I do appreciate the fact that you're participating in the discussion as well. So with that said, James, can we continue with the next segment? Part two.
Yeah.
All right. I've been collaborating with the Clovis archaeologist, Richard Michael Gramley. He found me on a ResearchGate webpage and invited me to help him understand puzzling Clovis artifacts he discovered. He wanted to go beyond the typical Clovis archaeological approach that focuses on studying tools and their context. He's always had a passion to know how Clovis peoples themselves saw their place in their landscapes and cosmos.
Yeah.
With my background in comparative mythology, Paleolithic art and rock art, and psychotherapy, I could help him. Over the last 4 years, we've made some amazing discoveries, breaking through old paradigms and advancing a much deeper understanding of Clovis First Peoples culture. Dr. Gramley had completed excavating a site in New York State, the Bowser Road site, a mastodon sacrifice site, and published a book on it. At the Bowser Road dig, he found 21 ritually broken spear throwers, which in this hemisphere we call atlatls. He also found evidence that Clovis people crafted stone zoomorphic figurines depicting mastodons, at least one of which appears to have been attached to the end of an atlatl as a decoration, as he terms it, an adorno. This was the first ever discovery that Clovis people made three-dimensional symbolic sculptures. That was the spur for Michael to contact me for help. In the top image is the Bowser Road adorno next to a mastodon illustration. I've been asked, what's the difference between a mastodon and a mammoth? A mammoth has a 45-degree angle back, and that's stereotypical of every sculpture and depiction of a mammoth, both here and in Europe. The mastodon has a more horizontal or parallel to the surface of the earth back, as you see in the illustration. And so that sculpture next to it has a mastodon back. It also has a little flake removed to represent its eye. Dr. Graham identified on one atlatl an abraded groove. The adorno pictured at the top was a perfect fit for the groove. So that's how we infer, or Dr. Gramley inferred, it was a decoration placed on that atlatl. And in his book, he shows similar decorations from Southeast Asia. Below it is a combination or polyiconic sculpture. On one surface, to the left, is a mammoth with that 45-degree angle back, a mammoth facing the left, its head and trunk. On the back surface, the image is on the right side, on the back surface is a bison, possibly also with a head and trunk of a mastodon. It might be a combination, but definitely the shape of the back is a bison. So actually, that steep slope up onto the back hump of that bison is not with current bison. It's with the extinct bison antiquus or bison occidentalis, a megafaunal bison. We view Bowser Road as a site of a mastodon ritual sacrifice. And Dr. Gramley suggests a roughly 7-year age class initiation ritual. And during this ritual, old and worn out bone and ivory tools were deposited around the mastodon carcass, and fresh ivory and bone were gathered to make new tools. The textbook would refer to such a site with a mastodon skeleton as a kill site. That's what they call it. On the contrary, everything at the site is evidence for a sacred ritual. It is a sacrifice site. This hypothesis is reinforced by the fact that the miniature mastodon Adorno was inserted on one of the atlatls, perhaps the one that sacrificed the mastodon. If so, this is a guilt assuaging ritual known among hunter-gatherers across the world, as if to say, I'm not guilty. You offered yourself to yourself as an offering, and we honor you.
Mhm.
The Hiscox site, north of Buffalo, New York, is and was a saline, mineral spring, bog, and pond, and has possibly 18 or more individual mastodon skeletons, the most of any site in the Western Hemisphere. It is on historic Seneca Iroquois territory, and the Seneca still gather medicinal herbs there. Dr. Gramley spent a full month in 2019 examining and he also was involved in one of the early excavations of the site. But in 2019, he spent a full month examining and inventorying ivory, bone, and antler artifacts in the Hiscox collection at the Buffalo Museum of Science. He discovered a half dozen atlatl adornos, similar to the one from Bowser Road, and a whole series of carved caribou antlers, some still with visible red ochre on them, and some possibly with figurations carved on them. Here's Dr. Gramley showing a complete Hiscox Clovis atlatl made from a split mastodon rib. I joined him for one full day, during which I took 300 photos of over a dozen antler, ivory, bone, and stone artifacts that I immediately saw appeared to have zoomorphic figurations. Then I set about putting my artist eye on them, looking at pieces over and over again in photos. And I spent much of a year downloading and reading extensively on Siberian East Asian archaeology of portable art and ethnography of myth and ritual to discover what it would predict for Clovis peoples. I identified over a dozen sculptures and the animal species for each figuration. Based on this, I made the first ever reconstruction of the Clovis ecological spiritual worldview. In addition to red ochre and figurative portable art, Gramley discovered ivory sled runners, the first evidence ever found that Clovis peoples used sleds for transport. The Hiscox Clovis site has fossil evidence for a burial of a female human, 27 to 39 years old, and also a dog sacrifice. In addition, there are unique faunal objects at the site, such as a condor wing, a rabbit's foot, a giant beaver tooth, and peccary teeth that most likely were contents of a shaman's paraphernalia bag. Since in Siberia, East Asian beliefs, saline spring bogs are portals to the lower world, we've proposed that the Hiscox site sled runners and associated exotic objects are part of a female shaman's sled burial. I'll now show images of 6 of the dozen Hiscock portable sculptures I've identified. 2 Hiscock caribou antler artifacts have a Y shape, which are matched in size and weight. Each has a zoomorphic figuration on one branching tip of the Y. We call them Y sticks. One Y stick has the sculpture of the head of a golden eagle, bald eagle or condor, with its beak open. The top of its head is red ochred, which in that regard makes it more like the color of the head of a golden eagle. In face view, the beak appears half opened on one side and half closed on the other side. This would make it one of the most extraordinary sculptures in all of Upper Paleolithic art. The other stick has the sculpture head of a dog. The pair of sticks may have been part of a shaman's headdress or hafted to the ends of a shaman's staff. Siberian East Asian ethnography and archaeology predict that Hiscock Clovis people would sculpt both eagle and dog, and even sculpt them together. As I noted earlier, the Sakhalin Island Wilta shaman staff depicts both spirit eagle and spirit dog. And on shaman drums, the eagle is depicted with an open beak. Since snakes were mentioned, I'll add something I thought I wouldn't mention. The Yakut, which are a Turkic group in the Sakha province of Siberia, say that eagle created the first shaman, his body as a ball of snakes, and each shaman has a bird of prey mother, which reveals itself only at a shaman's birth and at the shaman's death. Also mention the Manchu. They're very important for understanding the Anzik site. The Manchu say a female eagle instructed the first shaman, who was female. In the Amur region, or Orak, Udige, Tungusks have eagle as a guardian spirit. To cure serious illness, Orakan shaman journeyed to the lower world, led by a two-headed eagle spirit. At 35,000-year-old site in Siberia, Malaya Saya, the sculpture of an eagle with open beak was found. Thus, this shamanic motif, eagle with open beak, has a 35,000-year continuity. As for the spirit dog, it is ubiquitous across Siberian East Asian ethnography and predicts it would appear among Clovis peoples in the Western Hemisphere. Orak, Yukagir, Koryak, Chukchi, and Kamchadal performed dog sacrifices. Sacrificed dogs were placed with dead shamans at their burial. Dog is guardian of the path to the realm of the dead. For Sakhalin Island Nivka people, there's a dog realm on the way to the other world. Dog is a psychopomp for the neighboring Ainu. For the Nanai on the mainland, a shaman's soul is taken to the land of the dead by a dog. In case of you or some other, in case you are thinking, as some archaeologists would think, I'm only imagining the Hiscock sculpture as that of a spirit dog. Here's another Hiscock caribou antler effigy. I call it Spooky Dog. because viewed face on, its profile is so thin, it seems to be in another dimension. Siberian East Asian ethnography on mammoth as a creator being who descended into the lower world via a spring or swamp and guards the portal, predicts mammoth or mastodon would appear in Clovis art. So here is such a Hiscock Clovis right sculpture. It is made of tusk ivory. As a tool, it appears to be an adze or wedge, but its distal end is not straight across. Why is it so? It is a tool decorated with figurations. You can see a mammoth with its domed head, trunk, and back at the stereotypical 45-degree angle. In the illustration image on the right of the page, you may see this mammoth, on the left of the page, you'll see this mammoth facing right, and on the right image, the mammoth, flip it over, the mammoth is facing left. You may also see the head, eye, and trunk of a second mammoth facing right on this same artifact. This is a fragment of proboscis tusk ivory. This is a polyiconic sculpture. It is a mammoth bison sculpture combination. On the right side is the mammoth with two eyes, trunk, and the 45-degree angled back, facing right. On the left side is a bison, head and rising hump, nostrils, possibly very vague. It's hard to know if this is natural or artificial. A horn and an eye, and that bison's facing left. And as I mentioned earlier, this is that sharp hump going up. That's the extinct megafauna. So on the collage, I've got a illustration, a reconstruction made by a really good artist, Raman Uchitel. This is his reconstructed image of a bison occidentalis.
Take your cursor and outline the very faint gray bison on your major picture there, if you would.
Here's that 45-degree angle back, the nostrils, the possible horn, possible eye. So you flip it over onto what's called the obverse side. And here you have the same, differently, it's a different sculpture, but the same species. So here you see the head of the bison and the really steep back coming up.
Yeah.
Possibly there's a little eye chip removed there.
I was also seeing a bison in the darker gray in the middle of your bigger picture there with the eye.
Here?
Yeah, I'm seeing just another bison.
I can't see it yet, but
with the darker gray, naturally occurring striations of the stone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Coming down.
Just behind the eye, but that's okay. We can.
Yeah.
Facing
left.
I have to really think. I look at these things for hours before I make an interpretation. And then,
yeah.
Well, humans are experts at pattern language, so we see these.
Okay, good.
We're cognitively designed to see these patterns. Yeah.
That's great. For the scientists in the audience who wonder, how do I see these things? I've been, first of all, working on this for 30 years and accumulating images. So in my animal species photo illustration archive for around the world, I have 3,000 photos and illustrations. And so I'm constantly looking and trying to narrow down by sort of subtraction method, what could it be? What is it? What is it not? What could it be?
Yeah.
All right, so we have a precise match in the sculpture to the bison occidentalis or bison antiquus, which was earlier. And they were, the occidentalis was alive when first peoples were coming south, for sure. And it evolved into the current bison. So, and now since I didn't write it in here, but because this is a new slide for me, I just put in bison mammoth combination. Archaeologically, this occurs. So this combination bison mammoth occurs at least at Malaya, Siberia, 35,000 years ago, and it seems to occur when I look at it, and also by some archaeologists who looked at the artifacts in the Ushki site on Kamchatka Peninsula, which is one level of that site's about 13,000 years old, and then there's a slightly later site at 12,000 years ago. They have dog burials there. They've got tons of sculptures. They got human burials. That site is a major late Paleolithic site in Siberia, which many archaeologists have been excavated over decades. And so there is one mammoth bison sculpture there. And so the mammoth, when I look at mammoth bison, I say, why'd they do this? So either it's only some kind of mythic creation thing, or because all these Siberian tribes, I don't know if all, but most, have dual maladies. So my guess is they have a bison malady, some of the tribal groups, and a mammoth malady.
But it's interesting you see hybrid figures in France as well, in Germany.
Yeah, they're everywhere.
Early on. Yeah, it's a thing.
They're in South America, North America, Central America. They're all over the place.
Exactly.
All right, let me move on. So yes, because we're zooming from Maine, and the state of Maine mammal is the moose. So here's a moose sculpture, and and so let's not forget that Siberian East Asian ethnography predicts that this most likely is a female moose, and more precisely, a depiction of the spirit moose, who is the son and mother of all life.
Wow.
And for you wild and crazy artists out there, here's a basal portion of a caribou antler, cut and flattened. Its outline depicts a mega cat facing right. And Dr. Gramley actually saw this before I did, because he's actually been in Kenya and in the high grasses when a lion appeared. So he knows how to recognize these things immediately. So it depicts a mega cat facing right. This is either the extinct Western Hemisphere lion depicted, or the saber-tooth cat. A cupule is abraded in the center of it. And this cupule, and at the upper end in the illustration, is applied red ochre. So we say it's likely that cupule was used to hold red ochre or other pigments for painting. So Dr. Gramley edited and produced a book on Hiscock and several other sites, published February 2022. I have a long chapter in it, about 60 pages, and also wrote several hundred pages of supplementary backup information on the Siberian East Asian mythology, textile designs, genetics, and more, which we find textile designs that we have in the Amur Sakhalin area to this day, the spiritual textile designs have the double scroll motif, which is in Algonquin art. And that double scroll motif does not occur in other Siberian or East Asian textile designs or art designs. So that Algonquin design came from that Amur Sakhalin area up the Pacific coast across the Beringian Bridge. And my chapters and their supplementary information are all on my web pages at ResearchNet, researchgate.net and academia.edu. So to take a couple minutes, any
Paul?
questions on the Hiscox site?
Okay. Yeah, I have a question. So pattern recognition and seeing imagery appear in stones quite naturally or on the cave wall quite naturally. We saw a lot of that in the painted caves of France. The
Yes.
ropes of the stalagmites etching on the wall very much look like a mammoth. You add an eye, you add a little bit of a detail, and suddenly this spirit animal is appearing from the cave wall or on a rock. I mean, people today are looking for Jesus and Mary on a piece of toast, right? And considering that quite magical and significant. So to see, that's a phenomenon that we engage with. I see it in the clouds. I can't be dismissed just because we see these patterns in the clouds, right? They're significant when they show up in nature, when nature gives us these and delivers these very significant symbols. We collect them, we pick them up, we add a detail or two, and they're honored. Or if you put an image of a mammoth on the atlatl for which that atlatl is intended in a ritual sacrifice, it makes perfect sense, James. It's part of how we conduct our affairs. I mean, it just really makes sense on how we use symbols today, how they're significant to us today, how we engage the power of that nature's nod on the back, nature's pat on the back, that power of that animal, the rabbit's foot. We still do that today. So how widely accepted is this phenomenon in figure stones? And it reminds me of a recent guest, Thomas Wynne, with First Sculpture from Hand Axes to Figure Stones. He too, and Tony, his co-author, were finding figure stones in significance early on.
Yes.
Older than Homo sapiens sapiens. So
yeah.
it's just something we do.
We've
right?
been doing this since the, at least since the Oldovan pebble tool culture of Homo habilis and Homo
You find a
rudolphensis.
little face, smiley face shining up at you, you pick it up, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We
And
still collect pretty
I
stones on the
think
beach.
it's pretty ubiquitous among indigenous cultures in this hemisphere. They still make they still depict or use paintings on rock surfaces where there are crevices or caves, indicating spirit animals are emerging from them.
Yeah, we just went to the V Heritage site for the equinox, and there was Ken Zoll pointing out in this beautiful vertical rock face with 1,000 petroglyphs, the crack, the naturally occurring crack, and all the animal symbols, petroglyphs. And he said that's the point of emergence, right? So,
Sometimes like in European cave art, the head of the animal emerges from the crack.
yeah.
And
So, I mean,
I had a little exchange with archaeologists who published on Neanderthal art in Europe, and they showed on a cave they were dated certain images like handprints and stuff. Well, they did not say, maybe they were very cautious for various reasons. They did not acknowledge that where there was an image of actually a mastodon, excuse me, a mammoth, in the cave wall, in the fluting that came down and the stalactites down the wall, it was, to me, obviously, there was an animal in the shape of the rock. And then at different periods of time. Neanderthal and maybe Magdalenian artists painted animals on that same rock surface.
Right.
So, okay, in Europe, it's probably 100,000 years old.
Our pattern recognition neurons at work. But also, I want to say that even the most distinctive feature, if you just show that, it alludes to the entire animal. So again, in fond de gamme, we were seeing very stylized female parts, right? Just the pubic area and thighs. And the guide pointed out that's the whole female. That's all you need to know that's a symbol for the female. We were seeing that very distinctive 45-degree outline of the head of the mammoth, the dome head, and then the hump. All they did was a line, and you knew instantly. I have never seen a mammoth in person. I've only seen the illustrations. I've only seen this abstract line. I could identify, yes, that's a mammoth. But imagine growing up in an environment where you see them on a regular basis. That's all you need, that simple line. And it shows how sophisticated you are when you go to the abstract, right? And what a shared language of symbol it is when you need just a simple distinctive line, and that depicts not only the animal, but the entire mythology and its role in your cosmology. So here was a language of symbol. Here were shared symbols. Here was a shared grammar of symbols, right? It's so exciting.
Yeah.
Sorry?
A place for storytelling.
Yes, thank you.
And initiation.
Yes.
For ritual.
Yes, and you put red ochre on something, you're in ritual, right? You're in ritual. And so to understand also, you have a mammoth sacrifice, it's ritual. Here you are laying your old tools made of its bones and tusk as to a way to say, thank you, I'm turning these in. Now I'm going to harvest the new material, your tusks and bones, to make the new set of tools. I mean, that is beautiful. That is engaging in
Poetic.
relationship. That's mythopoetic language right there, to engage and to say thank you. And from your power, from your creator being, from all that you've brought to us and been to us, we are going to turn. It's like, yes, you're the mother lode. I am coming back to mother. And it's a complete cycle. It's so beautiful. It is so beautiful. Yeah.
Beautiful way to live life, to have that interconnectedness and that sharing back and forth. And
to honor the cosmology, to honor the creation, right? Also, you mentioned sleds. I just want to mention, here is a culture that makes innovative, startling use of everything. And I think that I learned a lesson in how durable these ancient materials were versus modern materials. And that, again, was from Jan van Ijselstein, who worked with these Olchi shamans of the Amur River in Siberia. And she brought them over to Seattle. We got to meet several of them.
Right.
And she gave them Gore-Tex. She told the story of how she sent them home with Gore-Tex parkas. And then years later, she asked, well, how did those Gore-Tex hold up? Right? Gore-Tex is supposed to be made for the ice. And they say, well, it lasted a year or two, but really our own skins do a much better job of lasting through the rigors of a Siberian winter.
Right.
And it's so interesting. And, you know, it's snowing today, so I had to partake of my faux fur little jacket here and bone, you know, I'm like honoring the Ice Age as best I can. But you know, okay, this is washable. I don't have any real furs. I wouldn't know how to care for it. Right. So in our day and age, we're not out there in the rigors that the people of the Ice Age are. We're not withstanding those kinds of conditions. Right. But, you know, I want to say no animals were harmed in the making of a jacket, but the earth was harmed with synthetics, right? There's a cost to everything. So I can't say that our materials are superior to theirs, but you are going to be talking a little bit more about the sled rails pulled by maybe, dogs. But I want to say it's not that difficult to find a smooth surface to slide along the ice and snow, whether it's interstitial warming and you're up north or the Ice Age. It was no, I mean, I can believe they would make sleds. So I want to see the evidence in the next segment.
And I also want to return.
That is innovative.
And I want to return back to this whole concept that really is inspiring today, James, and that is that you're showing the human story from the perspective of the sacred.
The mindset, right? The interiority.
The mindset of the sacred, that we can have that relationship to the life that surrounds us in a way that's profound and meaningful. And even though in this day and age, if there's, we apply today's worldview and we're judgmental about the killing of animals and this and that. But the reality is that all of this was done with such grace and insight, and so it seems
Honoring.
like in an honoring way that that was a key element to your presentation so far for me, and that is that we're once again we see this element of how throughout the human story, when we go back to our ancestors, when we go back to our back to the connections of ourselves, we had that relationship. And I think it's more and more and more, there's such a desire to return to that somehow, where we're so distracted by our iPhones and our computers and everything else.
Our synthetics.
And our synthetics and all of that, that we look with a certain honoring ourselves back and say, they figured something out. We've always dismissed it somehow as that we're so far more advanced, but yet the advancement that we've taken, the road of advancement has taken us away from what makes us human sometimes.
They survived, they populated the globe, and they did so under duress conditions. Right. And they have lessons for us about our own survival and the treatment of our planet and our world and our place in it. I mean, so many lessons. And I will say that, can't wait to get to discuss with you about our work and this cosmology and its connections.
Yeah.
But any other questions, comments before we get to the next part?
Yeah.
We just wanted to enthuse about this with you.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's move on to part 3.
Oh, actually, Alan did raise his hand.
Alan, I didn't see you.
Okay, I'll take it right now.
Yeah.
Alan, go ahead and turn on your mic and ask your question.
Okay, is it turned on?
Yes,
Yes,
you are.
we got you.
Yeah.
All right, amazing. Okay. James, I just wanted to ask you about one or two of the constantly recurring themes that you and I have discussed over the years in these the portable rock art from many different places. One that's always intrigued me. What's your latest thinking on the one eye open, one eye shut motif?
Oh, we're going to get to that.
Yeah.
Yes. Life, death, waking, sleeping, paying attention, not paying attention.
Or seeing with your inner and your outer vision, seeing what is hidden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I find that all the time, and at my project here in Ohio, as well as in Europe, Germany in particular, Australia, stuff I picked up down there in the bushland. It's just it's all over the place. What's your latest thinking on that?
Well, I'm glad to hear that I'm glad you're attending, Alan. So it's nice to see you. And I'll be talking about it in this next part because that's one of the themes from Anzik.
Okay, great. Oh, by the way, your website appears to be down right at the moment. Is it supposed to be?
And that's a whole other problem with the logistics and the company that has it.
I
Don't know what it's doing.
I feel
all right.
All right.
All right, thanks.
Oh, thank you.
We'll get back to this in a minute. Yeah.
That's okay. Back to
And think who's got one eye open, one eye closed besides Horus and Odin. I mean, that mythology extends to these days as well. But go ahead. Yeah.
So then after working on Hiscock, what was next? So Mike said to me, well, now you must examine the 135 artifacts from the most famous of all the Clovis sites in the Americas, the Anzik site in Montana. So 135 artifacts, I'll be spending decades on that. The Anzik site, this is an infant burial site, the only known Clovis burial anywhere in the Western Hemisphere. The human bones are those of a male, 1.5 years old. Apparently the infant was buried in red ochre, as some bones are stayed with it. are stained with it. This is typical of Gravettian burials. They're all in red ochre. The bones have been dated 12,800 years ago. So this would be late Clovis. In addition, probably separate from the burial, which is a view that I have developed and not the current consensus, which puts the burial and the tools together. In addition, probably separate from the burial, there are these 135 artifacts. There are 113 lithics, stone, and 22 segments of beveled rods made of elk bone. I've already talked about elk, so we're already in symbolic territory with that. This is the richest Clovis artifact cluster found in the Western Hemisphere. The burial is in the talus slope of a low ridge on the tributary to the Shields River. That's one of the great, currently one of the great fishing rivers of Northern America, the Americas, Northern America, as it's called. The tributary to the Shields River. I reviewed Siberian, East Asian, and Northern Western Hemisphere ethnography reports on the mortuary practice of talus slope burial. It happens to especially occur among the Kootenai of Montana, the Silesian, Shoshone, and Northern Paiute of the surrounding region. Most relevant, the Amur Nanai and Nivka and the Kootenai, Mandan, and Iroquoian Seneca and Wyandot state that infants were given special mortuary rites. Deceased infants and young children were deposited in places close to an everyday trail to expedite rapid reincarnation in the mother's womb. Such beliefs and practices were apparently applied to the Anzac infant. The Montana archaeologist Larry Larum noted to me that the Anzac Ridge itself, the full length of the talus slope viewed from the north, resembles the head and trunk of a mammoth. Here's my Google Earth view. That would place the Anzac site in the nose, the trunk curl nose of the mastodon spirit. In 2021, a grad student at Montana State University, Alaric Allen, saw in the Helena Museum display case that one of the Anzac stone artifacts was shaped like a bear. This was the first observation in the last 60 years since the Anzac site was discovered that it has possible sculptures. Alaric reported this to Gramley, and Gramley in turn mentioned it to me, and we put together a proposal to examine the artifacts in Montana. The artifact owners would not approve it. The museum kindly sent me a full set of high-resolution photos of the front and back of every artifact. These are like 2 to 3 megabyte photos, which of course I can't put on a Zoom or PowerPoint. So you see smaller images. I spent 2 years putting my artist eye on the images, and I've identified at least 17 and up to 40 artifacts that appear to have fair to good, what I call fair to good figurations. Apparently, the entire artifact cluster comes from the paraphernalia bag of a shaman storyteller. At some, perhaps other time, the infant burial was placed nearby it in the talus slope, located near the stream and everyday walking trail, which served as a portal for the infant's Omi soul to be reincarnated in this world. I discovered among the Clovis artifacts 9 themes, but to go through them all, I don't have enough time. And all the themes are predicted from Siberian East Asian archaeology and ethnography. So I'm going to show 4 of the 40 sculptures I identified. The rest are all on my ResearchGate and academia.edu website. In the middle photo is the sculpture that Larry Cowan spotted. He said it was a bear. I looked more closely, looked through all my imagery files. It most resembles the extinct megafauna of the giant short-faced bear. And there's an image of that, reconstruction illustration below. It's a remarkable sculpture of it. On the opposite surface in the top photo, it has a natural mineral inclusion near its center, an oval, light-colored shape. These Clovis knappers are incredible because they flake this bear around that mineral inclusion on purpose. This light-colored oval shape would be depicting the womb of the spirit bear mother,
Huh.
the mother of animals, a deity type ubiquitous among hunter-gatherers around the world. Because I'm sometimes accused by archaeologists who say, oh, prove there's flaking on that to make an image. And I think, well, can't you see it? This is, and plus they show where the flaking is for all the onset projectile points and bifaces, and these little illustrations on the left, that's from a thesis by Jones, 1996. So I said, okay, I'll begin after that bear with this. This is a stunning and amazing artifact, one of the most amazing in the entire Western Hemisphere. It's a classic style Clovis projectile point, like the one I started to show, which is on the Wikipedia, the only thing for Clovis culture. It's a Clovis projectile point. Collectors collect them everywhere they can see one on the surface. It is typical of American archaeologists to always display a fluted point pointing up. Very manly. But obviously, in this case, 100% misleading. So we rotate it to the point to the left. The Clovis flint knapper has chosen a piece of beautifully colored flint with natural black mineral inclusions running across it. The knapper had turned the flint sideways and flaked it to make a perfect framing of the most important ceremonial cycle of the Clovis peoples. It is a precise match for the Tungusic annual life renewal ceremony, which has 2 components, one in the fall and one in the spring. The top image, the top photo, this is a therianthrope, a human animal. It looks like humans are animals, a human and a non-animal, a non-human animal. The top image is therianthrope. It looks like an upright bear, shaped with bear legs and the bear's rump, holding an instrument, which I suggest depicts a spear or spear thrower, atlatl. This appears to be the Clovis variant of the Tungusic bear man, who during the autumn ceremonial goes on the cosmic hunt, ascends to the sun elk mother, the creatrix of all life, to plead for the release of game animals at the spring earth renewal ceremony. The image of the bear man touches an image of an elevated tree with roots.
Hmm.
This would be the roots of the sacred cosmic tree. The Ulchi, who reside near the mouth of the Amur River, and who I learned today actually make reference to the mastodon, the Ulchi, who reside near the mouth of the Amur River, say the cosmic tree is the birthplace of a shaman's soul and life strength. And near its roots resides a shaman's primary helper spirit, the elk. In the projectile point's corner, below the tree roots, in that black mineral inclusion, is an image of an upside down elk or deer head, as in Ulchi shamanism.
Hmm.
This flint napper was so incredible to be able to flake that projectile point and capture all these mythic, ceremonial, shamanic images.
Like you framed it. Yeah.
To this day, Colorado Ute people hold an annual bear ceremony and dance. The black and white image shows a Ute petroglyph panel of the bear man ascending a tree to the upper world. Just here they're on the tree, here they're in their upper world, there are little stars around, and the associated game animals, this is could be an elk or a deer. There are other animals on other parts of the panel. And these are also sort of like Y sticks. Flip the fluted point over to its back surface, and there's the image right here. This image of an elk mother kissing her fawn. This represents, because the fawns are born at that time, the spring earth renewal ceremony. In the Anzac site collection are several artifacts which, based on the Siberian Paleolithic art, as I was reminded by Russian archaeologists, depict the theme mask face with different or asymmetrical eyes. One eye open and one eye closed, or squinting, or crescent shaped like the crescent moon. I show the similar motif on a Yupik shaman mask here, and Inuit shaman mask down here, a Samoyedic speaking people's Nganasan mask here. It's kind of hard to see in this picture. That was found in a shaman burial. And here's a stone sculpture from the Siberia site in Magadan province on the Pacific coast, Russia, from around 10,000 to 9,000 years ago. On my webpage information sheet, I have the description of this sculpture, very detailed by a Magadan archaeologist. And it is clearly one eye open, one eye closed. And not so well seen here, but one eye has a crystal interior to it. The other eye is different. It's definitely an asymmetric, it's one eye open, one eye closed theme. The same motif occurs in the Ulchi mythology. The celestial goddess, creatrix, she has sun and moon as eyes. And it also occurs in a half dozen or more Salish creation stories about how the face in the moon came about, which was a sibling rivalry between two women, and after the same guy, and so that ends up creating the face in the moon, and that face itself is two asymmetrical eyes. So on a dozen or more Pacific Northwest coast Salish petroglyphs, this one eye open, one eye closed theme is depicted. And that's also in the material on my website. I have pictures of that.
And we even saw that in Thomas Wynn's book as well.
Mhm.
Some of the faces,
I see we're coming
different
to
eyes. Yeah.
2 o'clock here, but let's just go quickly with the last Anzik collage I made. So this piece of chert is a piece of a biface fragment. I first note that an archaeologist wrote the thesis on Anzik, illustrated all the projectile points and all the full bifaces and some of their fragments, but made no illustration of this supposedly broken piece of stone. No one had ever asked why such a fragment would be deposited with the other artifacts in some shaman bag, as we would say. So look at the lower photo of the artifact. In the large black area is a good depiction of the Milky Way, the spirit path to the upper world. Or sometimes those same people say it's a soul, thanks to the Shoshone, a soul rising cloud-like on that path.
Yeah.
These are the Shoshone from Wyoming, right? Not far from, not too many miles from the Anzik site. We've been there forever. The smaller black circular area in this white cortex of the stone might have depicted a burial hole in the earth, perhaps in snow or ice, or a talus slope. Whole books have been written on the Milky Way, the spirit path for Algonquin and other tribes of the Western Hemisphere. And so if you're interested in the Milky Way, you can find those books on Amazon and wherever. And I talk about all the references I could find on what I posted on ResearchGate. The opposite surface of this stone is shown in this top photo. It appears that the Clovis artisan shaped this piece of stone to depict the head of a bird facing right. I show in this collage the only 5 bird species that are possibly depicted on this stone. In the region around the Anzik site today, the 2 jays, the Canadian jay and the blue jay, and the sage grouse, depicted here, the sage grouse, are indigenous sacred birds to this day. For the Nivka on Sakhalin Island, the wagtail bird created the earth. That was the creator, wagtail bird, from objects floating on the primal waters. The Anzik sculpture looks to me most like the wagtail bird. Here are 2 images of the white wagtail ocularis bird in breeding versus winter plumage. This white wagtail is in Siberia and Northeast Siberia and in North America. So this one on the left, this is a white wagtail in breeding plumage. This to me is like, wow, this napper was trying to nap the white wagtail at breeding time. And so just these Clovis nappers were incredible.
And using the natural color of the rock to best advantage there too.
If you look at the artifact in the lower photo again, point to the left, it also evokes, with this little black nose and white color, and the slope of the head, the spirit coyote or fox, maybe both, since in the Pacific Northwest and Northern Plains, coyote and fox are sibling rivals and have opposing roles pertaining to the origin of death and also life.
So how beautiful that this same stone just turned upside down depicts another animal, even another form of being a hybrid, right?
And this is, I learned this first long ago, along with Alan Day. Whenever we were in the Pacific Northwest, whenever we were in Northwest Europe, and the collectors were showing us stones, they taught me, rotate them 180 degrees or 90 degrees. That's where you see the other iconic images.
Gotcha.
So every time I look at something, I rotate the image.
Yeah.
Okay, Calico Hills, Paleolithic Mannix, in the now Mojave Desert near Yermo, California. In Calico Hills, a collector, Richard Dempsey, a California artifact collector, notified Gramley of an amazing find at the base of one of the Calico Hills in the Mojave Desert. And Michael went out there to check it out. Yes, it is a Clovis female figurine, as predicted by the Gravettian culture from Europe to Asia. And so more will be found someday at Clovis sites. In the archaeological illustration to the right, which Dr. Gramley had made, as well, I think this is his photograph, might be Richard Dempsey's. There will be, this is an over in yellow highlight, an overshot flake. This is a signature for Clovis. So even though it's found on the surface, this is Clovis. It's a Clovis signature, and it's another example suggesting that Clovis descends from the Eurasian Gravettian tradition. And these Clovis finds tell us that Gravettian is a global tradition. There are also animal sculptures on this, but I don't have time to get into that. It's a mother of animals. Dr. Gramley, when he visited the site with Richard Dempsey, they found, Michael identified another 4 or 5 types of tools which prove it's a Clovis area. Clovis
Oh,
site.
wow.
And now move on quickly, just have a couple more slides. Lower Blue Lick site, Kentucky. Dr. Gramley discovered in an excavation in the fall of 2022 that this Kentucky site has a second Clovis sled made of tusk ivory, the runners of tusk ivory.
Here we get to the sled runners. Yeah.
This site is like Hiscock, a saline spring bog, and thus it's a portal, Clovis portal to the lower world, presumably would have a shaman sled burial. So here's Gramley with one of the section of a sled runner, the front section, and also was discovered a section of incised diadem, which is typical of a Gravettian. Part of a diadem would go around your head. It's never before been identified at any Clovis site, but Dr. Gramley and his team found one there. And hundreds have been found in Asian Gravettian Upper Paleolithic sites. Also at Blue Licks, Denny Vesper on the team discovered a Clovis blade core. You see that in this picture, front and back. And that's been reworked, that core from which blades were, these are blade removals here. Blades were removed. This is reworked. It's a sculpture of a mammoth. And so there's another Clovis mammoth sculpture at this site, a diadem and a sled.
So you were saying that these tusks were split lengthwise. How's that even possible?
The tusk is split in half lengthwise. And this, Dr. Gramley could maybe say more about this. This is flattened, abraded, smoothed down on this side here. And this notch is cut into it.
To attach to the sled.
to the other section. There are 3 sections of runner on each side.
Oh, okay. All right.
The families obtained absolute dates for each of the 6 sled runner sections. The sled has a minimum age of around 15,000 years ago, makes it older than any other Clovis site by 1,000 years.
Oh my
It's now the
gosh.
oldest securely dated evidence for a sled in the world. This is evidence, and it's also red ochred, mirrored on some of the runner sections.
Oh my.
In the May
Because it was
issue
used in a burial, right? So you take a
of
working
a shaman,
vehicle similar
shaman,
to the Vikings, a boat, right?
Yep.
Where you want to use it for a burial or,
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense.
yes,
It would help transport you to the realm of the dead, right?
to
Ritually.
the lower world
Lower.
portal, which is a Tungusic, Siberian, other tribal motif.
Yeah.
In the May issue this year of the journal L'Anthropologie from France, we have an article co-authored by Dr. Gramley and myself on the Hiscock and Blue Lick sleds and their shamanic context. I write the ethnographic context. Dr. Gramley got an artist, Ren Harvey, to give her vision of what we now view as a typical Clovis shaman sled burial. This will appear in the L'Anthropologie article. The female shaman with their antler headdress, which someone asked about earlier, it could be what we found actually at the Hiscock site. It could be that the antler, 2 Y-stick antlers could be like this. Or we now think, because we have a section of the staff like this, was probably hafted to a shaman staff. So there'd be a different head at each end. So you'd have eagle here, if you're holding it vertically, eagle here, and dog here.
Another hybrid.
And everything, all the motifs you put in here, there's on the shaman drum, that's like probably an Olchi drum sound. It's got a mammoth on it. It's got the other animal motifs. Here's the shaman wrapped up and in the skins. Here's a shaman paraphernalia bag, the shaman spear or staff, the red ochre on the tusk ivory fragments. And here's a dog. pull the sled, hopefully not sacrificed like at Hiscock, but maybe, who knows? We haven't dug enough yet at Lower Blue Licks in Kentucky.
Oh my gosh.
That's
Wow.
that's it.
Wow. And that's the end of your slideshow. Oh, well, congratulations to you both on some just brilliant insights and work. Oh my gosh. Raise your hand if you have questions. We are going to run a little over time just to discuss this. And thank you for extending your stay with us, James. But where do we even begin? Oh my gosh.
Well, the implications are just so far reaching and so powerful to think of, And it gives such credence to the idea that, like we said in the beginning, the technology of the ancients was far superior than ever given credit for previously.
The innovation, the use of materials. Right. And I do have one question. A diadem is a ring around the head, right? A crown of sorts. How does something like bone or stone get to be of a curvature small enough to fit over the head?
You'll have to ask our archaeologists here. On the line.
And same with the mammoth tusks, which are huge. So they're using the end points of getting the right curve and putting several together, it looks like, to create the support for one sled. So runners on both sides, rather like a boat with the holes, right? What do you call them? Trimarans, right?
I think the sled runners are slightly different, and I just can't remember. At Hiscock and the sled at Lower Blue Licks. So Dr. Gramley would.
And how do you make a reproduction to test the theory? Experimental archaeologists love to go in and recreate these things, but it's hard to get hold of some mammoth tusks and split them lengthwise and test them. So what do you do in lieu of?
Let's bring in
Yeah.
Professor Gramley as well.
And we must congratulate you, sir.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you and James found each other to continue this research
Yes.
and more into depth. It's a perfect marriage of the archaeology and the mythology, right? The symbology and what it means. Welcome.
Thank you. Jim Harrod is my esteemed colleague, and he spends a great deal of time. It was we complement one another very carefully. We each have our own important things we have to attend to. Mine is more in the realm of field work and discovery and visiting museum collections. His was, but now he's an expert on these matters. But in regard to the query about the sled, the Hiscox sled was not recognized, its very existence, until I went through the museum collection. And I found, much to my amazement, that an entire side of that sled had been found still in situ. Now, this was terribly important because the succession of runners was therefore preserved. The largest runner is in the center, and we call it the Papa Bear runner. The one at the head end of the sled is the baby bear runner, and then the one at the opposite end is the mama bear. The Papa Bear runners, and we of course have the same thing down at Lower Blue Lick. I mean, in that sense, these sleds are identical, and they're almost identical in length. They're approaching 9 feet, 9 to 10 feet, which is a perfectly reasonable for a sled that is used in the Arctic. There are numerous examples of sleds that are similar in length, but the important thing is that at Lower Blue Lick, and we have dated all 6 runners, and I'm glad I did, because what I found most remarkably, these people had used both old and newer ivory in their sled construction. The 2 runners in the center, the longest ones, the Papa Bear runners, the ones that needed to be strongest and bear the load primarily, and the banging and so forth, and stay unbroken, they were likely of the animal killed most recently or killed at all by these people. And they came out matched in age. Can you believe this? 12,500 radiocarbon years, basically, which calibrates to 14 to 15,000 years old, making it the oldest dated artifact, a securely dated artifact in the New World, I mean the North America, comparable to the material, of course, from down in South America, the Monteverde site, which is equally old. This sled is the oldest sled in the world. It is most beautifully made. It has red ochre upon it. But then, of course, what you realize, once you know the length of the sled and the proportion of the width to the length, then you look for cross members. And we found 4 cross members that had not been recognized, going to a sled most beautifully made from mastodon bone, both pelvic and femurs, and the largest
Like the stronger bones. Yeah.
the largest complete cross member was nicely painted in red ochre. These are burial sleds, and of course the sleds made of mastodon ivory. These were probably ritual sleds, not meant for everyday use, of course. But maybe everyday sleds were made of wood, but these were made for the spiritual journey, the journey of the spirit to the netherworld. And they were painted with red ochre, and they were left there along with the body and the dog and a pile of artifacts and the staff. Jim Harrod did not mention, of course, that at the Hiscox site, directly upon the scanty human remains, which have come to light to date, and there are probably more to be dug, there was this staff. I didn't even the central section of this staff was an enormous caribou antler that had been split right down the middle. The 2 Y sticks, which are matched in weight and in shape, I thought initially went to a headdress, on top of the head, but I realize now they can fit on this section of staff, making a staff 50 some inches long. I mean, it's a
Wow.
glorious artifact. It's clearly the most important Clovis artifact that's ever been unearthed in the New World, and they're comparable. If you want to see a comparable staff depicted, you must go to pictographs or in the Altai mountain region where people are dancing with such staffs. I mean, it's a shaman's staff, surely. And but it goes on. I mean, my goal, as you may see, is to lift Clovis studies out of just pedestrian involvement with stone tools. And I've dug up some of the biggest and most beautiful Clovis points ever unearthed in Washington State. And I love them, but I know there's much more to it than that. I'm an anthropologist. I have a Ph.D. in anthropology. And when I dug the Bowser Road site, and I found this wonderful kill site that had been a place to honor the animal, I realized that I was beginning to do anthropology.
Right.
And
The
it's
meaning of the
continued-
culture.
It's continued ever onward. And, there's just the sky's the limit. There are just so many wonderful artifacts. If you have the imagination to recognize them, some of them don't need much imagination to recognize, but others need the imagination of Jim Harrod and people who have grown familiar with the forms, and you yourselves. I'm humbled that I never thought, being 76 years old, I'd have this opportunity to make important new discoveries.
Oh my
I thought
gosh.
I
Yeah.
just and I'm continuing. The lower Blue Lick site is likely to yield some fantastic materials, and the diadems. These are pieces of cementum, the cementum layer off a tusk. Any Proboscidean tusk has this cementum. It was cleverly removed in Eurasia. The Jena rhinoceros horn site, a famous workshop for such materials, has 44 of these diadems. Any site you care to name that is of Gravettian age has these bands, headbands, if you will, diadems, sometimes decorated, sometimes not. And now we have them
Here
like
as well.
in the New World. Yes.
What's exciting in addition to all of this, to celebrate these people and their accomplishments and their worldview and the decoding, is that in our work, we are finding these same motifs. We are not schooled in all of this. We just come in, people just open sessions that we record, and we do our thing. James is familiar, he's a teacher of this work. And we have visionary experiences of becoming the tree of life, where our head is in the cosmos as branches. Our trunk is our spine. We're rooted deep into the earth. Just yesterday, in honor of James coming, we did a Malta from Siberia posture in this ritual. And somebody's talking about the Rainbow Bridge. And I was thinking about your diagonal access, James. The Rainbow Bridge would be another form of that. We go through wormholes into the cosmos. We are liaisons. We're told very clearly, we are liaisons between earth and the heavens. And that is our role. We are called to become responsible members of the web of life. We are told very clearly, gesturally, symbolically, emotionally, being one with the all, that we are part of the web of life, that all of life is our brothers and sisters, that all of the cosmos is our playground. We are there hanging out with the stars. We have these experiences that are part and parcel of the mythology and the cosmology, James, that you've been describing. And so this is what's exciting to me, that this is a lived tradition. This is embodied spirituality. These are lessons that, as Dr. Goodman, anthropologist who founded this institute, retrieved this work from her studies of ancient people and rituals around the world. had the flash of insight that the postures depicted in these ancient artifacts are ritual instructions. Hold this posture, drum or rattle. Let's call to the spirits. Such a simple ritual. So we are being schooled in the eternal now, as she would put it, that this realm, this repository of which you speak, is as alive and well and accessible to us today as it was to these people. That this mythology, this symbology was not invented by them. It was delivered to them by this huge evolutionary arc of the cosmos of 14.7 billion years, that the cosmos is alive and well and thriving. And we are but its children and made to reflect it back to her. I mean, it's just all of a piece. And this was my quest, to understand and find a worldview in which I was a part and it made sense and it included everything. And so this is what's exciting to me, is that even you were decoding the Paleolithic people. When I first asked Dr. Goodman, how do I find my indigenous ancestors? I know they're there. We were all indigenous one time. And she said, look to the cave art, look to the earliest art. Their artifacts are there. And you can engage in psychological archaeology. And you can be experiencing what they experienced in these realms. They're still accessible. The doorways, these passageways of which you spoke, James, they're still open. There's a long-standing covenant through ritual to go and partake. You talk about the burials passages. These passages are also open to us here and now, and we go there to bring back lessons, to connect up the dots, right? To be better members. James, talk about saving the planet, hearing the call to save the planet. Because I think, Richard, this is what is part of the call for us, to bring back that wisdom, to reactivate it, to renegotiate our relationship with the ancestors, with the spirits, with the greater world, to reset and make right again our role with ourselves, with our community, with our planet, with our cosmos. This is what we are trying to invoke here. So it brings me to tears to hear your journeys as well, to put this other piece. That's what they were doing. That's what we need to do again today. Make it relevant, make it accessible, but we're hearing that call.
We can speak for people who are long dead.
Yes.
Rather imperfectly, it's true. Jim would admit that our explanations are imperfect, but we're trying to bring forth some of the devoutness and the color forward into the modern day. And we realize that people of the past, and it's not so very long ago, compared to tool using as a practice, it's just yesterday, but still in all, it's gone. And people who find these artifacts just don't seem to be able ordinarily to recognize what they evoke and what they can evoke.
And the story they have to
publish
tell.
routinely on this.
Yeah.
James, talk about when I heard your presentation of Friday, there was a woman who talked about, I'm hearing the animals speak to me, and they're saying, do your part to make the ecosystem, to save it. There's a bigger story here. This is important.
I did a similar presentation for the Young Center in Brunswick, Maine, Friday evening. And as I've mentioned in this talk, the animals are calling us to, when we encounter them in dream or vision, to honor them by making representations of them in art or music or dance. And that now in the Anthropocene, the animals are calling us to save them. That,
Stop our destruction.
I was trained by, I had some training from Michael Harner, and as well as Felicitas Goodman, and the book Animal Speaks and other books. People are saying, oh, you do these trances so that the animals give you powers that like them, animal powers, and that may be a minor part of this thing today. They're now coming to us. They're calling us. They appear to say, save me, this species, this to save us. We're an animal too, so save us. And so, so when I mentioned that in question and answer period, there was a comment from a park ranger in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And she said, I don't know what river, she said, I was next to the river when I think it was, I can't remember whether it was the, probably not herring, but the salmon came up the river to spawn. And they were stuck because that river was not polluted, but was polluted by so much vegetation now that they had trouble climbing to their spawning area. And so she said she heard them calling to her to
And the
clean,
heron that was
help,
feeding on them.
hey,
Yeah.
save us.
Mhm.
They were saying help, help, help. But she was so surprised by hearing that I hope when I mentioned it, it actually supported her and that she wasn't completely crazy. But
She
for
said it
sure, the
was,
river needed could be cleaned up. So she started with the Parks Department in Massachusetts a cleanup of that section of river and getting all those weeds out of there so that the fish could come up the river. But yeah, they're
yeah.
calling us.
And I would agree that animal spirits aren't there just to empower us. They're there to bring us into the fold of working on behalf of team life, right? Team planet.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a larger team than just ourselves. We need to be in community to the larger whole.
Well,
So, Richard, what do you make of all this? Does this surprise you what James found and what he decoded in terms of mythology and the connections? Did he more than fulfill the task you asked him to do?
as a partner and researcher.
As a partner, I rely upon Jim. It saves me from spending countless hours. I love the reading. I have a reasonably good library here, but I don't know it. I have duties as an archaeologist. I put catalog numbers on the things we dig up. I have responsibilities. I have a protocol to follow, and it just doesn't include enough hours to be a good student of mythology and things. But I recognize that it's a special skill, and so we work. Two heads are better than one.
There you
Yeah,
go.
two
Yeah.
different skill sets.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
that's exciting.
fabulous that you found
We're
each
like
other.
the shaman's staff.
Yeah.
I don't know whether I'm the dog or the eagle. He's the other effigy, but we are being wielded by ancient shaman, long dead. We're clan mothers or whomever they are, may have been. They still have their influence upon us.
Looking down on us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is beautiful to me is how logical the symbols are, right? And talk about
Once
the
you start
wise
decoding,
staff.
yeah.
And then I can go through my memory banks and go, oh, I've seen that. I didn't know the significance of it at the time. But Thomas Riccio was talking about his meetings with shamans, say in I think Alaska, and he's saying that he had the shaman tree, and it was a bare tree with many branches, and he couldn't figure out the significance of it. And now you're decoding it as where the many worlds are connecting.
I think the finest artifact that I recognize that I had in my hand from the Hiscox site was the palette with a cat head, the head of a lioness, frankly,
Yes.
and it has red ochre on it. There's no question that it was painted. It's no question it's an artifact. It's very cleverly done. But I like Lafcadio Hearn, who felt the origin of art was in shadows projected upon the caves in the walls of the tents. And these objects could have been used in such a fashion by the shaman and others when telling stories. They were storytelling devices, I don't doubt. Some of them were. And we can't know the stories necessarily, but we can certainly imagine the stories. and these remarkable artifacts. And that artifact had lain unrecognized in the collection of the Hiscox site. One of the greatest treasures I should ever have the experience to touch. And I'm an old world prehistorian. I've seen a lot of this type of thing. I've visited many of the sites, as I'm sure everyone here listening has. And I realized finally, we don't have to go to the old world to find these things. The old world came to us a long time.
That's a great line.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, the old world came to us. I just want to mention that at one of the archaeology conferences we went to, the big news was, don't put the big bright lights in the caves. Come and look at where the torches once sat and put those back. And they've got lights now they were talking about that don't give out fumes and are very safe to use, and flicker, make them flicker like a torchlight would. And then you will see these come alive with the shadow play, the light and shadow play. And I want to say that one of the guests we have coming up is our good friend Marie, who was a guide at one of the most beautiful private caves in France. And she was showing us in the end chamber of which mammoths were up at the ceiling. And she said we're the most significant animal, a portal to the heavens as well, the celestial realms. She showed us, you wouldn't have recognized it until she put her light behind a rock column that had a single eye shape out of it, and it was napped carefully into the face of a cave lion. And so the light behind it threw the shadow of it and made it come alive for us. So there was the presence of this female cave lion, and move the light around and it flickers. Oh my gosh, so much there that you really have to spend time with to get to know.
Yeah.
And just, I mean, it's the magic that happens when you see a wild animal and it looks you in the eye. The magnificence of these animals, to have lived with them before they became
wisdom.
domesticated, right? Before we try to conquer nature, to have that relationship of living with these magnificent animals, to understand their breeding cycles, their migration, their symbology, their powers,
Right.
and to honor them like this, an entirely different relationship that we had with them back then, right? And then nature, and you come together, and then they're there to be present with you.
Yeah.
Such a magical experience, just such a magical. So thank you for both of you for helping
What an
this
inspiration.
come alive in these
Yeah.
new ways, and
Thank
to
you.
bring it to the new world, to
Yeah.
bring
Thank you
it
for
to
the
our
opportunity.
backyard.
Yeah.
Are you free next Sunday? I just had a cancellation. Richard, can you join us next Sunday and tell us more about your work?
I'd love to if we'll
You're
talk
booked.
more about it.
You're
Surely.
booked.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right.
Okay.
I just want our audience to know what to expect next
Hold on,
Sunday,
yeah.
because we've heard James.
Hold on to the edge of your
Half
sled.
of this, we need to hear your half of this. And hold on to your sled. Good one, Paul.
Yeah.
Good one.
Well, I have some ideas that I have yet to put in print, so
Oh.
I'd be happy.
Test
I'd
him
be
out on
happy to
us.
share, but they're factual based.
Well,
Okay.
that's the best
Perfect.
kind.
Yes, we need that. We start out with the facts, and then we imagine. We have to use the imagination to fully decode them and to
Yeah.
feel them, right? So,
want
James,
to
this
have
is your couple of hours. Thank you so much, Richard. We'll
Thank you.
schedule
Thank you
this
so
with
much.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
I'm so glad you were here to add to this. And James, we need the concluding statement from you. This is your couple of hours, so we
I want
Like
to
my
thank
father.
I would like to thank the Shawnee and Seneca, the two important sites, probably the tribal groups that are around Anzik, because I descend from a colonial Viking family. So I hope this is my offering, as I mentioned, and for myself, unburdening.
Yeah.
And so thank
Beautiful
everyone.
gesture.
Well,
And all the
Burden
spirits.
ourselves.
Thank you.
I'd love to
Yeah.
know, and I growing up in Maine and having such a huge family connection in the state of Maine, I love going back to the indigenous aspect of that story, growing up on the Kennebec River as a child and all of that. But listening to you reminds me that I'm a part of a tribe of something, some kind of moose tribe or something there, because there's just a connectedness to that part of the world. And I really feel drawn to it. I want to return and spend time with you and have some conversations for sure. What a great opportunity for us to look at your research, look at those implications. I know Laura's been talking to you for years, and private conversations. So for you to come out and publicly share all of this, just amazing. So,
well, I want to say that in your 30 years, James, you have done so much. You have broken so many barriers. And there's so much to say. You'll be our guest for many other episodes. And the next one will be March 26th, I think.
Okay.
When you will be talking about Ice Age art in Europe as well. So you'll talk about the portable art, the Ice Age art, and we'll talk about also the postures that we derive from some of these Ice Age artifacts, of which there are just a beautiful handful. And these were among Felicitas's favorites as well. Indeed. Yeah, so there's a big story there, but Paul wants to conclude. Thank you so much, James. We look forward to more. Again, congratulations.
Everybody, 1 second, please. I'd like for you to turn on your mics and say thank you to our guest today and give them a little bit of applause for such an amazing amount of effort and research and tying.
And if you have specific comments, please open your mic right now to thank James and Richard
I want to say one more thing. I must mention that I put the link in the chat room for our interview with Jan Van Enkelstein, who was the one that worked with the Ulti tribe. It's unfortunately she's passed away, but we were able to capture part of her story, and it's very interesting. All right, everybody, say goodbye and speak up loudly so I can hear you.
Thank you. Fascinating.